Welcome to Women of Courage, Season 2, where my guests continue to share their courageous stories. It is my hope that these stories will encourage and inspire you as you face your own challenges, that you will take action to courageously pursue your own dreams and passions, no matter what obstacles are presented along the way. I'm Ann Miner, your host for the show, and my guests are women of courage, women from all walks of life. Whether their challenges involved their health, their family, their business, or their career, it's apparent that every aspect of their life was impacted. Our women of courage have found the strength and the courage to confront, to overcome, and to succeed in spite of everything. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment with today's Women of Courage. Welcome back to Women of Courage. With me today is Dibblee. Welcome, Jo. I'm so pleased you're able to be with us today.
Thank you, Anne. This is just feels like a dream come true to be able to start sharing the story that needs to be shared. So I'm so honored and privileged to be here. Thank you.
And I know that your life has been filled with challenges, and I had no idea. So please start at the beginning.
Well, it's definitely a story. How do you put 52 years into a minute? But I'll share this. You know, we all have our things. We all have our challenges. I began. Our family was. My parents were good-hearted, but they had some challenges, and so began the journey. I slept in a cereal box for the first 3 months of my life, but that's a different story on another day. And then as I moved, as I grew up, I had some situations that happened. I was sexually assaulted when I was 16, and at first no one believed, because when you come from a dysfunctional family, you are disenfranchised, you are disposable for the most part, and unfortunately people don't know how to handle it. If it was to have happened today, I would be treated differently. But at that time, I wasn't. When I did, in fact, report what happened, the RCMP and social services were hesitant to believe me due to our family's upbringing. As a result of that, I wasn't heard, and as a result of that, he went on, unfortunately, to murder children. So it was an unfortunate, sad, tragic, catastrophic circumstance that led to much worse. And when I talk about myself, I say, don't be sad in the sense for me, because I lived. The children whose lives he took did not have a voice.
My goodness. What on earth did you do to keep yourself together through that?
For myself, you know, we all have what I refer to as earth angels in our life. And people showed up in my life at key points, even growing up as a young child before I was assaulted. There were people that would present themselves that were, as I say, there but for the grace of God go I. I could have ended up a different path. Many of the girls that were assaulted by that same person went on to choose lifestyles that were unhealthy, drugs, alcoholism, sadly prostitution. But I had people, and I guess in my heart, I always knew there was something better. I knew that life didn't have to be defined by what happened, whether it's when you're growing up or from somebody else's decision. Even our own pasts don't define who we are. So I kept hopeful, knowing that life was better somewhere, that if I kept looking, I would find my purpose. And it's now that I know my purpose, but back then I was a little confused. But it was people reaching out. And what I say to people is never underestimate your power to change a life. Look what you're doing. What you're doing by sharing stories is making it possible for people like me to share my story and be able to create a ripple effect. Because each of us has a gift within us. Each of us has something that's intrinsically so valuable, and yet until you find it, you might sort of walk that path. But I would say what kept me going was the people that believed in me before I believed in me.
So come back to your story, Jo. You're 16. Is that where it begins, or does it begin a little before then?
It begins before then. As I mentioned, my parents, they were good-hearted, but they were both not well. My dad served in World War II, had probably one of the classic and worst cases of post-traumatic stress disorder. And back then they didn't talk about it, and they didn't even really know about it. He was so affected that it affected every area of his life. My mother equally had some very traumatic challenges in her childhood. Her twin sister was raped. She found her twin sister. Her mother didn't believe her because the man who raped her was her stepfather. And so you can't expect a 13-year-old to be able to parent when she leaves home at 13. I wasn't born until much later for her, but in essence, she was 13 when she went on her own. I have more respect for people that have had to overcome, because being out on your own at 13, you're not equipped. So between my parents and the challenges they faced and the mental illness they dealt with and the tragic circumstances that it was layer upon layer upon layer. Many, and I believe you will not know this, and we've shared some stories in the past, my mother was a prostitute at the hands of my father. And so in essence, my story of wearing frocks or costumes is when I refer to a frock, it's a costume. I had to disguise, because in our society you're expected to be like other people in order to function. And so I referred to them as frocks because I would layer up to protect myself. On the outside, I looked perfectly normal and very successful as a businesswoman. Inside, my heart was broken because I wasn't actually speaking my true message, was to tell people to frock off, live undisguised lives, and live at their true potential. But it really started as a child. I wouldn't have met the man who assaulted me, who went on to murder children, had I come from a very functional home, probably because I met him as a foster parent.
So, as a foster parent, so that were you in his home?
I was, and at one point social services stepped into our household to try and alleviate some of the challenges I was facing, because I was essentially taking care of my parents, taking care of my siblings, and it's a large family. I was number 10 of my fathers. I was number 1 of my mothers. And by the time social services stepped in, I was basically raising my younger siblings. They said, you need a break for a weekend. And their intentions were great. I don't want to discount or take away from anyone who works with children. That is not my intent in this. In sharing my story with you, my intent is that we become more aware. And back then, this was classic. If you wanted exposure, if you wanted access to children, you were in some of these areas. But there are fabulous, fabulous foster parents, so I don't want to taint that. But in essence, they brought me there for the weekend with the idea.
Like a respite weekend.
Yes, yeah, exactly. To have time to just for me. And when I first went there, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't put 2 and 2 together. Because I had come from so much dysfunction, it seemed like maybe this is what normal people acted like. I was asked during that weekend if I babysat, and of course I was raising my sisters, so of course I babysat. I was asked, was I comfortable with little children? Well, of course I was comfortable. It was part of who I was. In fact, I would choose babysitting over dating any day. I thought little children were awesome.
Yes.
A little warped, but it was what I did. And so when I was called back to babysit, it didn't happen during that weekend. It happened a few months later when they called me back to babysit. I was a crime of convenience, if you say that. I had gone back home. I'd only been there for the weekend, and then a few months later I'm called back to babysit. I'm there, and my intention's to babysit. It was a ploy. And he would go on to assault many, many girls. But then as the best way I can say this, somebody who is a serial rapist or a serial will go on to, they have to raise the ante. And so that's what he did. But I was so lucky I actually got away from him. He stalked me for many, many months. I would come out of the school and there would be the big Navy pickup and him sitting in it smiling. And it wasn't a smile. It was a lack of a soul. I've forgiven him as a human being. I will never forget what it felt like. And my goal is that no other victims have to feel and live. So I basically lived in fear for 35 years because I became the key witness in the murder investigation, because by the time the police believed my story, he had already gone on to murder. And I would become their only witness that was capable of testifying over the next 35 years. And I would hide and hide.
We're going to take a little break, Joe, and when we come back, I want you to tell us more about that. Stay with us. We'll be back in just a moment with more of Joe Dibblee's story on Women of Courage.
If I were blood, I'd take today.
Welcome back to Women of Courage. I'm here today with Joe Dibblee, and we're going to pick up your story, Joe. Just before the break, you said you were a witness in a murder trial.
So how that plays out is that the police, the RCMP, would stay in touch with me over the 35 years, and they would come and they would take affidavits. The challenge with our system, and this is why I'm so committed to, I wrote the story Frock Off, Living Undisguised, because our system has limitations. It is wonderful that you are innocent until proven guilty, but when you are an assault victim, you become the guilty party, in a sense, because you retell your story. So what has happened is the evidence, unfortunately, was tainted, or it lacked enough for them to go to court. So they kept building their case. When I refer to becoming their witness, I was a witness via affidavit, where I would meet with the RCMP to retell my story. If you've heard anything about sexual assault victims, they relive their story over and over, and that was the case for myself. So they would come, they would interview me again, and they would tell me where we were at. Along this process meant I was also hearing about how many more children had been affected. So in essence, I bore the responsibility of being their only source because of my experience. I knew who my attacker was. I was still alive. In the case of many of the kids that obviously, they went on, they assumed he was alleged to have murdered them. Some of them were never found. So he got smarter and smarter as he went. In essence, he was only detained for 7 days. And I say that and I stop because I think about all the people, all of the victims that lived, if they lived their life like me, in fear for 35 years, he spent 7 days. I spent 35 years serving in a different way. So I was their key witness. And they would come back and say, we need you to retell your story. Many times we were close to going in, but our system is broken and we need to change it. We need victims to have a voice.
Joe, did you know any of the victims?
Yes, sadly I did. I had an opportunity in grade 9, one of my classmates, Cindy, she was your, classic, we're grade 9, we're in art, and she just was one of the most lovely people you've ever met, and just kind. And one day after school, I met her younger sister, Susan. And Susan, in passing, we met. And it wasn't one of those moments where I can say we connected, but yet I always remembered Susan just in passing, because she was someone's little sister who was my classmate. And when the police came at 19 and knocked on the door and said, we believe your story now, and sadly, they explained to me what had happened. They asked me if I knew Susan Duff. Well, I did know Susan Duff. And over the last many, many years, over the 35 years for sure, Susan became my inspiration. She is the only reason I was willing to testify. Not on my own behalf, but on hers. And the reason is she had absolutely no voice. Her voice, she was 12. And I look at my life now and I think I've had 40 extra years to fall in love, fall out of love, have children, go on trips. realize amazing things. She was 12. Her life was taken. She was 12 years old. So no matter how scared I got, Susan was my inspiration. We all have those people in our life, but she was mine. I carry pictures of her with me, and it is because when I get scared or I get freaked out, I think about the fact she never ever had a chance to be. She never even had a chance to be freaked out and be 52. Right? Like, how cool is that? I lived. And it is my responsibility to share, to be her voice, to be the voice of all of us who were affected by this man.
So at 19, the police now had come to the conclusion that you had told a true story. So then, is that the point at which you went into hiding, or
Yes.
officially?
Well, in hiding with regards to the police, yes. Because prior to that, I was in hiding on my own. What I was told was to keep a low profile for the most part. In other words, it was for my own safety. This man had told me the last time he saw me that he would finish the job. And finishing the job meant taking my life. And I was clear. And once I knew Susan had been murdered, I knew that there was absolutely no doubt in my mind that this man would do what he needed to do to keep himself safe. At that point, I had children, or I had a daughter. At 19, I had a 3-month-old. And when they came to the door, I had my daughter in my arms over here, you know, because they're teeny at that point. And I looked down at her and I realized, you know, as a mother, you realize what that means, that someone's child was taken. And so it was very easy for me to look at my child and realize that easily could have happened or could happen to me. And that's why I kept on being willing to be. And when I went into hiding, it was, if I felt at any moment he could find me, I would move. I've moved 49 times. I'm 52 years old. That is not normal. Yet, when you wear frocks, you tell yourself. I would say things like, I love moving. I get to put my stuff in new places. In essence, I didn't love moving. I was afraid. I had convinced myself, I wore so many frocks, I had convinced myself that this was a great way to live. But every time the police came, it reminded me it was a necessity. It wasn't just for fun, let's put it that way.
So Jo, now you have told your story in a book.
Yes, yes, it was time. It was time. I wrote Frock Off. I think I've shown this to you, but I wrote Frock Off, Living Undisguised. In some ways, yes, it was healing, but my goal is to help other people. My goal is to have people understand that you're not defined by any one moment in your life. There's a classic joke about people living to 25 and essentially cutting off their life and not taking on new experiences. So they may live to 75, but they basically stopped living at 25. So they did time, essentially. My goal is to say, you're not defined by anything that's happened, by anyone. My past, my parents' past, I wore all those frocks of shame, frocks of guilt. I was an innocent child, for Pete's sake. And yet I wore them like they were mine. And so I wrote Frock Off, Living Undisguised, so that people will realize that it just doesn't matter. Stop wearing your ill-serving frocks. Wear your fabulous frocks. You know, feel good about who you are. Showcase who you are. If you deliver the best of who you are, you will impact the world. You know, at the end of the day, when I brush my teeth, there's only one person looking back at me, and she can be nasty if she hasn't done what she's supposed to do, okay? And what I mean by that is, at the end of the day, I want to know that I did live fully, that I actually loved with an open heart, and that I impacted someone's life. And some have asked me, you know, in writing my story, am I scared? I'm not scared anymore. My frock of fear is long gone. My goal is to start a revolution, to have people stand up, frock off, and start living their life undisguised. Live to their truest potential. What you're doing, Anne, is what's making a difference. It's impacting. You're giving voice to those of us who had no voice for a long time. And for me, it's about giving Susan a voice. She may have only lived to be 12, but her legacy will go on. Every book that we sell, I donate a third of our proceeds to 2 very worthy causes. One is Little Warriors, and the other is Because I Am a Girl. In hopes that we will start this revolution and that people will stand up, they won't be defined by something else, and they will have a chance to truly live their life's mission, their life's purpose, their life's calling, whatever we might call it. Because as I said, there but for the grace of God go I. Had I not, had I not had people that loved me in spite of what had happened, even though they knew nothing, they just knew to care, it's my turn to give back in a meaningful way so that others will walk and not be defined by the stuff that's happened.
And now, a few words of wisdom from a wonderful, wacky, one-of-a-kind woman, Jezebel Peppa.
Hello, darlings. Jezebel Peppa here. I can remember back to when I was a baby, or can I? But I'll tell you something. When I was a baby, I was never more authentic than I am then. I try to be that way now, but think about it. As a baby, when you are hungry, you cry, somebody feeds you. When you don't feel good, you cry, somebody loves you. Then we start to get reprogrammed. Well, I'm here to tell you, stop being reprogrammed. You'll find that you've started to live your life for somebody else. You might be somebody's wife. You might be somebody's mother. And I'm sure there's some little part of your life where you're not really being you. We want you to come out from behind that. Be who you are. I'm going to challenge you. Take a step forward, find one little spot in your life where you're not really being all that you can be, and try and change that. People may not like it at first, but they'll get used to you. So celebrate the fact that you can be who you really want to be, and remember to celebrate the Jezebel in you.
There's some talk about this, and it's going to materialize.
Well, thank you, Jezebel. And thank you, Joe Dibblee. You have certainly inspired us today, and I, for one, am motivated to take the next steps on my path. As our thank you gift, you will receive a copy of my book, Succeeding in Spite of Everything, and you will take home our beautiful centerpiece by Floral Occasions in Ingersoll. Now, we would love to hear from our audience. Last season, many of you wrote to our guests directly to let them know how you had been inspired and encouraged by their stories. We would love to be able to share your comments and feedback on future episodes of Women of Courage. So please contact me directly by email at the address below on your screen. Remember, in every setback lies opportunity. Opportunity for you to call up all that you've learned through other people's stories and what you've learned through your own experience. To rely on your core beliefs and values, to rally your strength and your courage, to find your way through, to overcome, and to succeed in spite of everything. Until next time, be courageous.
What step would I take today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I...
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line at 519-660-7548 or email us with your comments